When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the fourth living being say, "Come." And I looked up and saw a horse whose colour was pale green. Its rider was named Death, and his companion was the grave. These two were given authority over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with the sword and famine and disease and wild animals. When the fourth seal is opened, the last cherubim calls forth a pale green horse, an image that represents death. Thankfully, I've never seen a dead body in the flesh, but I'm told that this is the colour that corpses turn. In other words, as a result of all this war, economic troubles, famine, diseases and natural disasters, death will inevitably follow hard on the heels of all those things. Now when it says, these two were given authority over 1/4 of the earth, this is often interpreted as a quarter of the planet's population will die. It may not mean that. It could just mean, and I think this is the more likely explanation, that a quarter of the Earth's geographical area is going to be particularly badly affected, like the Middle East, for example. Now that we've looked at the first 4 seals, it might be useful if we put them side by side with the Olivet Discourse. By doing so, we'll discover that they mirror each other almost exactly. During the Olivet Discourse, the first sign that Jesus gave was false messiahs, false prophets, and false religion. So it's interesting that when we turn to the first seal in Revelation, we see a white horseman representing false messiahs, false prophets, and false religion. The second sign that Jesus gave was an increase in wars and threats of war. Again, when we turn to the second seal in Revelation, we read about a red horseman who has authority to take peace from the earth, and of war and of slaughter. The third thing that Jesus talks about on the Mount of Olives is famines and earthquakes all over the world. So when we turn to the third seal, we read about a black horseman who causes economic crises and famine in the world. The fourth thing that Jesus talked about in the Olivet Discourse was persecution, suffering, and death for following him. And again, when we turn to the fourth seal, we read about a pale green horseman representing death and the grave. There seems to be quite a clear correlation between the two passages, and if it's a valid comparison to make, we should also note that around the third seal, marked by economic collapse and famine, Jesus tells us there will be an increase in natural disasters. Here's a graph from the International Disaster Database that illustrates how this is happening right now. Scientists warn that this trend is going to continue in the years ahead, attributing the phenomenon to man-made climate change. While the theory of man-made climate change is debatable, the Bible makes it clear that they're right to predict increased volatility in the natural world. Every time you turn on the news and see a tsunami, a flood, an earthquake, or a hurricane causing devastation in some part of the world, you're actually witnessing the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And that raises an important question. Where exactly are we in the prophecy timeline? We've seen there will be an increase in false prophets and religion, and that's already happening. We've seen there will be an increase in wars, and that's already happening. We've seen there will be an increase in economic crises, food poverty, and wealth disparity, and that's already happening. And we've seen there will be an increase in natural disasters and disease, and that's already happening too. With this in mind, I believe that we can legitimately entertain the idea that the first 4 seals have already been opened and we're already experiencing the beginning of the birth pains. The news channels seem to confirm this with every passing day. Many people want to know where we are in the timeline of events and how long we have to wait until Jesus returns. No one can answer that question accurately. However, Jesus did tell us that we would be able to discern when the time was approaching. He said, "Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you can know that his return is very near, right at the door." Since we can indeed observe all these things happening in our world right now, we might not be at the end, but we can say with a certain degree of confidence that we're at the beginning of the end. And although we don't know how long the birth pains will last, we can say with some justification that they've already begun. That should focus our minds as we consider how to live in the times ahead. When the fourth seal is broken and there's an increase in death in the world, it appears as though that's especially going to be true for Christians. Jesus says during the Olivet Discourse, "Then you will be arrested, persecuted, and killed. You will be hated all over the world because you are my followers. As we've already noted, while that has always been true, while Christians have always been hated, persecuted and martyred for their faith throughout history, there will be a noticeable increase towards the end. In the same way that there have always been false prophets, but they're going to increase. In the same way that there's always been wars, but they're going to increase. In the same way that there's always been financial difficulties and famines, but they're going to increase. In the same way that there's always been natural disasters, but they're going to increase. There's always been persecution for being a Christian, but it's going to increase significantly. In fact, this may even be describing a kind of end-time genocide. Earlier I quoted the International Society for Human Rights, the secular observatory based in Frankfurt, Germany, who said that 80% of all acts of religious discrimination in the world today are now directed at Christians. Statistically speaking, that already makes Christians by far the most persecuted religious body on the planet, right now, today. The Spectator recently published an article which said, in effect, the world is witnessing the rise of an entire new generation of Christian martyrs. The carnage is occurring on such a vast scale that it represents not only the most dramatic Christian story of our time, but arguably the premier human rights challenge of this era as well. Even places which were relatively safe for Christians are now becoming dangerous. In Iraq, Christians numbered 1.5 million in 1991. Today it's estimated that their number is closer to 150,000. That represents a 90% decrease in just over 20 years. No wonder some experts are predicting the extinction of Christianity from the Middle East. And then in other parts of the world, stories like these are increasingly common.
They know that we are Christians. I am a Christian. That is why you are here to attack me. He said, yes, I told you, we've been telling you people to convert to Islam, but you people refuse. So the only thing is to get rid of all of you and inherit all that you have. If you women say you will not convert to Islam and marry us, then we'll kill all of you, even you and your children and your daughters.
We started the praise and worship, not even 5 minutes into it. All of a sudden we heard someone screaming. Then we saw this stranger, walking in, and my younger brother, he was there, and he went to ask him what's wrong. He all of a sudden started punching him in the face.
I was trying to stop them, but they pushed me hard.
They were shouting and saying that stop this church and we don't want to hear all this nuisance.
Christians are being chased, hounded, persecuted and killed in increasing numbers all over the world. This is a catastrophe of biblical proportions, literally. Even in the West we're seeing a noticeable rise in anti-Christian, anti-Christ sentiment. Reports are coming through with increasing regularity of home churches being shut down, street preachers being jailed under hate speech charges for saying that Jesus Christ is Lord, Christian business owners being targeted for opposing homosexuality, and all mentions of God being removed from schools and halls of government. Right now the persecution in the West hasn't led to waves of martyrdom or even much physical violence. But just as Nero's persecution of the Christians began small, confiscation of property, illegalization of the faith and imprisonment, and then escalated, that's how waves of martyrdom generally begin. We must stay vigilant as Antichrist sentiment rises in the world. Anyone who has studied German attitudes towards the Jews in the 1930s will know that this is exactly how the Holocaust began too. At first it was just a whispering campaign, verbal abuse, then boycotts on Jewish businesses, confiscation of property and vandalization of homes. Before long they were being blamed for all of society's ills, just as Nero had blamed Christians for all of Rome's, and they were being carted off to concentration camps and gas chambers. We must not be complacent. Anti-Christian sentiment will certainly increase and get more severe as we get closer to the time of the Antichrist himself. Jesus says that many will buckle under the increasing pressure of this hatred from the world and will renounce their faith for the sake of comfort. He says, many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other. Others will leave Christ to follow the proliferation of false prophets who will tickle their ears with promises of an easier life. Sin will increase, immorality will increase, Christians will increasingly stand out, be excluded and looked down upon. It's going to take an increasing amount of courage to stand up for Jesus in the world. However, Jesus says that those who endure to the end will be saved. He doesn't mean that they will necessarily have their earthly life spared, just that they will gain everlasting life for their faithfulness to him, even to the point of death. Obviously, this means that the cowards who capitulate and do not endure to the end will not be saved. I'll repeat what I said and stay free. It is possible to renounce your faith, walk away, and forfeit your salvation. We must endure. Now, all this persecution and killing of Christians should help us understand the next seal in the sequence. When the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of all who had been martyred for the word of God and for being faithful in their testimony. They shouted to the Lord and said, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you judge the people who belong to this world and avenge our blood for what they have done to us? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and they were told to rest a little longer until the full number of their brothers and sisters, their fellow servants of Jesus who were to be martyred, had joined them. Here we see the martyred souls of Christians filling up heaven. This lends weight to the theory that the rise in Antichrist sentiment will eventually lead to a genocide. The tribulation of the last days will culminate in a great tribulation of martyrdom for the church. Since the fourth seal, which brought the rider called Death, affected only a fourth of the earth, this probably isn't a global genocide, but certainly it will affect a large part of the planet. This may even describe the virtual extinction of Christianity from the Middle East that some suggest has already begun. It's certainly in keeping with the Spectator article that suggests a new wave of Christian martyrdom has started there. At any rate, we shouldn't be complacent, believing that this will only affect our Middle Eastern brothers and sisters. We may all be asked to lay down our lives for the name of Christ in the years to come. It would do us good to prepare for this sobering eventuality, and to pray for those who are already suffering. John describes the martyrs in heaven shouting out to the Lord to give them justice. They ask him how long it will be before he pours out his judgment on their murderers. However, there are still 2 more seals to break before the scroll can be opened and God's wrath can be read and enacted. The martyred souls are given white robes, which will help us identify them later, and are told to wait just a little while longer. I watched as the Lamb broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake. The sun became as dark as black cloth, and the moon became as red as blood. Then the stars of the sky fell to the earth like green figs falling from a tree shaken by a strong wind. The sky was rolled up like a scroll, and all of the mountains and islands were moved from their places. Then everyone, the kings of the earth, the rulers, the generals, the wealthy, the powerful, and every slave and free person, all hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they cried to the mountains and the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to survive? When the sixth seal is broken, the sun goes dark, the moon turns blood red, and the stars fall from the sky. This heralds the beginning of the day of wrath. John describes the scene in heaven at this time. After this, I saw a vast crowd too great to count, from every nation and tribe and people and language, standing in front of the throne and before the Lamb. They were clothed in white robes and held palm branches in their hands, and they were shouting with a great roar, Salvation comes from our God who sits on the throne and from the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living beings, and they fell before the throne with their faces to the ground and worshipped God. They sang, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and strength belong to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the 24 elders asked me, Who are these who are clothed in white? Where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you are the one who knows. Then he said to me, These are the ones who died in the great tribulation. They have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb and made them white. That is why they stand in front of God's throne and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will give them shelter. They will never again be hungry or thirsty. They will never be scorched by the heat of the sun, for the Lamb on the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of life-giving water, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Heaven is being flooded with martyrs, identifiable by their white robes. One of the 24 elders asks John if he can guess who they are, and really John should have known because he's seen them being given their white robes during the 5th seal. But John basically says, "You know better than I do, you tell me." So the elder confirms, "These are the ones who died in the Great Tribulation." Since they have died in the Great Tribulation, it's simple logic to deduce that they must have gone through it. Indeed, the church has been on earth for all of the seals. It's been around to witness the rise in false prophets and false religion, which is the 1st seal. It's been here for the increase in wars, which is the 2nd seal. It's been here for the economic collapse, famines, and natural disasters of the 3rd seal. It's witnessed an increase in contagious diseases and death, which is the 4th seal, and a time of great persecution and martyrdom, which is the 5th seal, a time which saw many of them executed. In other words, there will be no secret rapture before any of those things takes place. The church will go through the tribulation described up until this point. Indeed, we get a sense in this passage that although the church has just been through some truly terrible times and has suffered greatly through hunger, thirst, lack of shelter, and although they have cried many tears, they're now full of relief and jubilation because it's finally over. They're in heaven now, they're safe, they will never suffer again. The feeling of joy is almost palpable. There's a buzz of excitement, an eruption of worship in heaven as they rejoice and worship God. Clearly, they are also anticipating the vengeance that God is going to pour out on their tormentors and murderers. And that day of wrath is now close. There is just one more seal to open.